he encouraged people to get a silver dime, what we call junk silver. And he said, at that point in time, you are breaking that debt slavery because you now own a piece of timeless wealth that can be passed on for generations. And that, I think, is how everybody starts their journey in this. I know for me, it was like once I held my first silver coin, I was like, I get this now.
Here at Liberty in Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty in Finance, and with us today, a new guest, Travis Leicht from Leicht Capital and On-Site Trav. And also co-hosting with me today is Kaiser. Travis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
One thing that Elijah and I know we have been talking about recently, and it sounds like it's something that is near and dear to your heart, is the idea of financial preparedness. And specifically, we were talking about this idea that a lot of people have where they're falling in the 98%, 99% of people who don't currently have much in the way of precious metals investment or any at all. And they go, well, when things start to go bad, that's when I'll jump and then I'll get it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's about, in a way, introducing people to it in a way that doesn't sound scary or doomerish. Because like when it's pitched, typically it's like, get gold because the whole entire financial system is going to come down and you're going to want that. And you're going to like trade that for goods and bread. And that's probably not very realistic. I think that the reason, like how I came about it, is my background was finance. I studied finance undergrad, and then I started to intern with guys and move into that realm. And when I was reading through textbooks, particularly those that were created before the 1970s, all of them primarily stated that you should have 5-10% of a portfolio when you're building a portfolio in precious metals of some sort of allocation, whether it's mining or some sort of allocation, which was weird because a lot of the modern textbooks that we had no mention of that whatsoever. So that was kind of my introduction to that. And then I found Mises, Rothbard, all the Austrians, and they were always pushing sound money. And I was like, what is this concept of sound money? And so later on, I was working in Washington, D.C., and I was around a lot of early crypto people, and they were speaking about sound money. And then it started to really click for me. So, I mean, I think when we speak about having an allocation towards it, I think it's because that is what you build a base off of. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you go and seek for yield once you've got your initial savings set up.
Andy Scheckman has often pointed out that forming that initial base, that foundation in precious metals for your financial portfolio, it really doesn't matter what price is, because you're essentially buying insurance, and you hope to never have to be able to use it, but you're forming that base of insurance of something that is real value and will never go to zero. Your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. It's something that's not correlated with the fiat financial system, but is very much the base layer of our fiat financial system. So when you actually get a gold coin and you look at it, it's a minted 22, gold eagle, and it's printed $50 on there. It starts to click with you. You're like, well, I purchased this coin for maybe 1,800 or 1,900, whatever it may be, but like it's printed with a value of 50. And that gives you certain privileges when you move that, say, cross border. And so the initial system that we set up, all prices are based on gold. And I think that's like one thing that we've kind of moved away from, is like all prices derived from gold. When we broke the gold standard in 71, we just rebacked to the dollar with essentially the petrodollar and the US military. I mean, that's ultimately what gave the dollar its value. But all of our pricing derived from a base layer of gold and a ratio between gold, silver, and copper. So that still exists, whether or not we utilize it every day. It's still, like Ayn Rand has this quote, which is an interesting philosopher, where she says, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Mm-hmm. and so, it's a very interesting quote from a very interesting character, but it's very true. And so we're kind of in that phase where we have this amazing opportunity where these things we haven't seen the price spikes in them yet. We haven't seen the rush to the door yet, though we're beginning to see it.
Yeah, I know one of the things that Elijah and I were talking about right before we all got on the call here was in the definition of precious metals is that it's something that one has utility, has industrial uses or monetary uses. Two, it is a hedge against inflation and currency issues. And three, that it has a history of being a storage of wealth. But four is the scarcity aspect of it, that there is a limited quantity of it. And that's something that is important to remember as we're thinking about, I know Andy's talked about a lot, the last 30 years that he's been in this business, there's never been a time when he goes, oh no, I can't get that. Or hang on, I got to get future orders months out and guarantee those to you and that kind of thing. And so with that of going, looking at the idea of, again, forming a base of your portfolio with this insurance of precious metals is looking at it from maybe the proper perspective, rather than going, I'll sprinkle it in on top after I have all my speculative, kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course. And then, but you really can't truly have your speculative unless you have that base layer. You hear Rick Rule talk about this all the time. He sleeps well at night because he knows what his gold holdings are. But he's a crazy speculator. And in his younger years, he was an absolutely insane speculator. But he always reminds you that the gains that he gained during those speculations, he's invested wisely and saved wisely. And I think that we need to break those definitions down. Like gold and silver are savings. And maybe an oil equity that pays a dividend may be an investment, and maybe perhaps Dogecoin is a speculation. And so we've got to categorize these, and then as we build out a portfolio, say like, okay, well, what should my allocation to each one of these assets, if you will, be? And that's a personal choice. But the neat thing is that we all have our own. We are given the great opportunity to put ourselves on our own gold standard. So when I first found these ideas, I was very upset for a long time. Like, I can't believe that they're doing this. The elites are allowed to just print endlessly. It causes this inflation. We're seeing the divergence of three classes become two classes. And it was really upsetting to me. But then I was like, well, why don't we just go out and inform people of this? Because I don't think it's certainly not a mainstream concept, but then also just change ourselves first. Man in the mirror type thing, where we can put ourselves on our own personal gold or silver or copper standard, which is something for someone listening. 1 in 10, I have found copper coins in change. So even today in circulation, any coin or any penny that was minted before 1982 is copper, and it's worth about 2.5 cents in value. So it's not a huge amount, but it's something that's real, and it's something that you can start with. Literally anybody can go through change and find a copper penny and begin. And this is a powerful concept I got from the Ninja. When I heard it, I was like, that is the best line I've ever heard from him, which was he encouraged people to get a silver dime, what we call junk silver. He encouraged people to get a silver dime, had a price of maybe $2, $2.50. You go to a local coin store and find something like that. And he said, at that point in time, you are breaking that debt slavery, because you now own a piece of timeless wealth that can be passed on for generations, but it is now yours. There's no further claim on that. It's not owned by JP Morgan. It's not owned by your bank. And then the IRS doesn't have a claim on it. It's literally yours. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. It wasn't the dime. It wasn't the copper. It was the mental shift that occurred in those individuals that made that. And that, I think, is how everybody starts their journey in this. I know for me, it was like, once I held my first silver coin, I was like, I get this now. Now I understand. Before that, it was like, I would see the signs in 2008, 2009, like, we buy gold, we buy jewelry, like all these pawn shop type of things, and I was just like, okay, that's interesting. The show, Doomsday Preppers comes out, and you're like, okay, these people are a little, maybe not quite well. Everything's going to be fine. The real estate market's taking a bath right now. And there's a lot of people are losing jobs and homes, but it's going to be fine, moving forward. And it always is. It's just during these times, and we happen to be catching this at the end of a cycle. Fortunately for us, we're all young men, and we're going to be able to, it's a good thing and a bad thing, I suppose. Right. But we're catching this at an end of a cycle. If we go through history, we find this every 80 to 100 years, this occurs, where you have a debt expansion of the currency, then you have some sort of collapse, which results in a hyperinflation or rapid inflation or an epic deflation. It could go either way, where the debt is essentially washed out. In the Old Testament, it was a debt jubilee, where they did this every 50 years or so, where it was just like, or every 7 years in the real and within the Jewish community. So they would just knock out all debts, and they just had a way to manage their economy where they're like, hey, if you're making a loan in year 5, just be mindful that the Jubilee occurs in, 24 months from now. And so that would change what we would call today, like the yield curve. Right. So if you're making a loan at that point, it changes the yield curve, and if the Jubilee just occurred, well, that changes the yield curve. So, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all the same. It's just that these cycles are very long. This one has been exacerbated by very competent, in a way, central banks. It is, if you look at when they were just getting started in 1913 and the depression that occurred in 1920, they just didn't know what to do. And that was the right answer. They did nothing. And that depression literally was a 12-month, 16-month thing, moved on into the roaring 20s. Then they got going with expansion of credit, and that resulted in 1929. Then they didn't know really what to do in the 30s. That resulted in a prolonged depression. At this point in time, they have really been magicians since 1971. And anyone who's bet against them has looked rather foolish. However, it's probably not wrong. They have just been incredibly early, not to their own, dismay, but it was the first time in history we've ever actually seen this. There's nowhere else where we can really go back and say central bankers were able to float this magical ball for excess of 50 years.
You mentioned how people can take their own freedom back, in a sense. They can take they can become their own central banks, as Gregory Mannarino often says, that you can hold precious metals and you don't have to deal with the fiat system or the consequences of the fiat system anymore. One of the things also, which is really interesting, is in this point in history, you can own something that is the safest place to put your wealth. It's like insurance, but you can possibly make great gains on it. We've looked at the anomalies, for example, versus platinum and gold, where platinum is under gold's price right now, or silver versus gold, where the gold silver ratio is around 90-1, historically very high right now. Your perspective on people looking to take advantage of the price anomalies right now and possibly swap into gold by either holding platinum or silver right now, but swap into gold later.
Yeah, so I've been putting some content on Leicht Capital, which is a new channel I started recently on my idea on this. But ultimately, I'm looking at a gold to silver ratio of approximately 1:90, which is about as big as it's ever been in history. I'm looking back in history to a guy named Sir Isaac Newton, who actually was a bureaucrat. You think of him as the apple in the tree and the guy that discovers gravity and does a lot of smart things, but he's actually like the treasurer for the crown for like a good 20-year run. And at that time, the crown was essentially going bankrupt. This is the British Empire. And they were just going through a debt cycle. If we were to go back in time, we would see 3 cycles ago, well, there's the British Empire doing their thing. And he devalued silver to a 1:12 to 1:50, or 1:15, 1:12 to 1:15 ratio, claiming that is approximately what is in the Earth's crust. Now we know that ratio now he pretty much nailed it, but it actually may be a lot lower than that. I've heard as low as 1:8, which is the true mining ratio today. So if you were to take the paper price of 1:90 and then the real ratio, the true ratio of 1:8, saying the mining ratio, or even just what he may have speculated, whether he was devaluing it for the crown or not, of 1:12, we can basically say there's a 10-bagger sitting there in silver. Relative to gold. If we use gold as our base and we put ourselves on our own personal gold standard and we evaluated things like real estate in gold ounces. I know I do that with our house. People are like, oh, your property is appreciated this way or that way. I look at it in terms of gold ounces. And if you do that, actually, real estate relative to gold is at all-time lows, which is a fun thing to look up and say to people when they're like, oh, real estates are at all-time highs. And it's like, yeah, to the dollar, absolutely. But like, to gold, it's actually at almost all-time lows if we look at a 100-year historical chart. And so, if we had some perspective, we would say all things return to mean. That's also a Rip Rule teaching. And so if they do return to mean, which in the fullness of time, all truths are revealed, we can say that we'll see a ratio that's closer to what the original founder set up as a 1-to-20 ratio, where we had $1 was $1 and a gold piece was a $20 coin. Which is like pre-1933 coins say $20 on them, which I know you guys sell, which is a really interesting thing to think about, especially when you like hear about a man named Henry Ford who paid his workers $5 a workday, and people now go, oh, well, that wasn't much. It was an ounce of gold every Thursday, and the conditions can be pretty bad for an ounce of gold every Thursday. And so it just gives you an idea of how truly wealthy early industrial America really was. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I certainly think that there's a trade there, especially for people looking to speculate a little bit on this, where they could possibly move from silver, move it into gold when the ratio becomes more of a 50-year mean, which would be like a 1-to-40, 1-to-50, and then use that gold to then go into whatever, when we get on what I say, the backside of this historical time period. So something I looked at was the gold to Dow ratio, which we've seen 3 times in US history, where an ounce of gold is equal to Dow. Today, the Dow is like 33,000. An ounce of gold is under 2,000. It's a 1-to-16, 1-to-18 ratio. In 1980, it was 1-to-1. In 1933, it was 1-to-1. And 1860, it was 1-to-1. Prior to that, it was actually less than that. And post-Civil War is a little less than that too. But we can basically zoom out and say, okay, well, we'll probably see a Dow of 1-to-1, whether the Dow goes down to 15,000 and gold goes up to 15,000, as someone like Jim Rickards may suggest. Or, vice versa. I mean, gold goes to 5,000, the Dow goes down 80% to 5,000, whatever that may be. But at that point in time, that may be the time. And I think it's important to understand, like, when you are on your own gold standard, perhaps you will never violate a certain position size. So like for our family, we'll never violate a 5% position size. But at this point in time, we're like upwards of 20-25% in some sort of precious metal allocation, like 95% silver. And what we will just allocate over at the ratio of 1-to-40, 1-to-50. We'll start taking maybe half of the silver at that point in time and moving into gold. And then at some important time when that gold to Dow ratio gets maybe 1-to-2. So, 1 ounce of gold is 2 shares of the, or excuse me, 2 ounces of gold is the Dow. Maybe it'll be time to start moving into that. To get a yield from it. Maybe at that point we'll draw down to 5%. We're going to really play this by year. We really have no idea how this is going to go moving forward, but maybe we'll draw down to 5%. And then from there, it'll just be the same boring thing over the next 30 years. We'll just start to rebuild up to a 10-15% position. And hopefully, like what I'm doing there on Light Capital, the grandkids will be able to see one day and be like, this is the best way to manage, long-term generational wealth.
Yeah. It's interesting, Travis, that you mentioned to do the same old boring thing again. I know both. I think of Brandon Roberts over at Bigger Pockets, which is a real estate one, and Warren Buffett has said the same thing of like, to be successful, you don't do crazy stuff and get have your emotions going crazy and like, oh my gosh, I'm about to lose everything or I'm about to gain so much and that kind of thing. He goes, you do the same boring things over and over again, and that's how you are successful, and that's how you make money. And I think that's a really interesting point to go. Look, it's exciting to look at Dogecoin and see, here's someone who put in $1,000 and they're a millionaire in paper money now, and that kind of thing. But what is, has stood the test of time and has stood every debt cycle and every, crash and all that kind of stuff is this thing that is, it's not exciting necessarily. It's not sexy, to use that word or whatever, but it is something that does provide this safety and security and stuff that you're able to use in terms of speculation and investment and as a base. But primarily that's what it's there for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with Gregory Marino on this, where I think silver's extremely sexy. I think it's great to look at, gold, etc. It's very warm, as Ross Beatty says. But I mean, yes, I mean, it is that core, and just like you said with Buffett, Buffett's secret is he tries to compound at 15% a year, which is historically hard to do. You got to do some research to figure out where can I get a 15% a year return and I can compound that, meaning 15 on 15 on 15. And that's it. I mean, and you're looking at a man that's 90 years old that's been able to compound it at, he's beat his 15 number. I think he's compounded at 21. But it's like, that's all it takes. Like his best investment is Omaha Furniture Depot. Bought a furniture store from an immigrant that was compounding at like 25% a year. And he never scaled it, never turned it into a Walmart. It was just a good business. And that's all you really have to do. I think when we look at silver, and particularly people that haven't purchased yet, that haven't gone out and gotten a first coin and just started to build that base, we look at it in like a doomsday scenario. And I think that that's the wrong way to look at it. I think what we want to look at it is that monetary energy, that's all money is money is this thing that I can move from like you to this guy to that guy. And you will do certain things for it. You will trade certain things for it. We can swap value. I know in Proverbs, which is the best finance book ever written. That's my next video that's shipping tonight. It is the best finance book ever written because it's written by the best guy the wealthiest guy. Let's put it that way. Nobody has ever been wealthier than Solomon. Nobody. And it talks about equal weights and measures, how the Lord detests unequal weights and measures. All silver is a unit of weight. All gold is a unit of weight. And we measure that against a day's labor, against a solar panel, against an electric truck, against whatever these things may be. And I think that the ascent of man has been a positive, graph up and to the right with some dips. So when we look at it and people who are put off by gold, or they're told, don't put any allocation to gold. You don't need any allocation to gold. And it's like, I can assure you the central bankers themselves certainly have an allocation to gold, very much so. Like the Rothschild family has an allocation to gold, regardless of what Gates and Buffett tell you. They most certainly have allocations to gold. Buffett's is a little bit different. His is called Coca-Cola. But like that is a tradable commodity. So like we've got to look at money as something that has monetary energy, and that monetary energy shifts from decade to decade, century to century, slightly. Gold is the most consistent. That's why it's the base foundation. Silver is the one that bounces off on top of it, but typically used for trade and commerce. And it actually becomes more consistent as you get velocity. So when you get velocity, this is like Bitcoin's problem. Bitcoin is a hoarding game. You hoard Bitcoin and there's only one Bitcoin a day coming to the market, price of Bitcoin's going to $1 billion. But like, if you got 5 million Bitcoins, 25% of the total supply moving around every day, every minute, you've got constant velocity, you have constant prices. So it's important to understand that this monetary energy moves from these assets to these assets. The dollar, the fiat dollar, has held its monetary energy for good 50 years. Because the real true fiat dollar didn't start until 71. Prior to that, it was a literal ounce of silver, a little less than an ounce of silver, but a literal ounce of silver. And the prices, if you go back to 1776, the prices didn't move from 1776 to 1913. You look at a dozen of eggs, or, oil was kind of coming on the scene, but a quart of oil, like all of those things were really consistent along the board up until 1913, where there's this debasement. That debasement comes to fruition in 1971. We move on to a fiat standard. And that's where things get really dicey. But we've got to understand that this monetary energy just went from one asset to the next asset to the next asset. We want to be forward thinking as investors, as savers, as people who are maybe concerned about personal freedom moving forward. We want to think, okay, what is going to give me the most amount of monetary energy, the most amount of freedom, the most amount of optionality. And when you look at that and you look at that list, and there's a few items on that list. Like silver and gold are absolutely the base foundations. And US silver, interestingly enough, gives you the most privilege. Let's put it that way. I think that's why Miles Franklin had that billionaire that insisted on US minted gold and US minted silver, even though the premiums were much higher than what she could have bought, say, on COMEX bars.
No, that definitely was a very interesting order. And a lot of clients do want just the US minted product for various reasons. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by the privilege of the US minted products?
Yeah, it's real basic. It's like when you've got a US minted Silver Eagle, it comes with SEAL teams. And that's the truth. Okay. So if I'm in a country, the promise of the United States is, we're going to tax you 35% if you're real successful. We're going to tax you when you're born, when you die. We're going to tax you all the time. But heaven forbid you find yourself behind enemy lines, if you will. Though we saw this promise broken, which was interesting with the BRICS nations coming up, because this is the promise of the U.S. But we have seen repeatedly in history, or at least during the petro fiat dollar, the SEAL teams are most definitely coming in almost every single case. I mean, Captain Phillips is based on this movie. So when you buy a US Eagle product, it's coming with a US guarantee, and the US guarantee is the petrodollar, and the petrodollar is the largest military by 10 in terms of spending in the world. So that is probably at its peak. We're probably approached a Rome moment where things are going to change on the chessboard, and maybe we're no longer going to be what we once were. Maybe we will have a dip and we will come back again, because as Warren Buffett says, never bet against America. Maybe we're just entering into our 1929 moment where we need this kick in the pants for a decade. We need to straighten things out, and then we need to come back and roar like America always has, and always, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future, probably likely always will. But when I say that there are exorbitant privileges, that's one of them that I mean. Andy has a story where he travels, I believe, to Canada with maples or with eagles, one of the two, and they're minted and they're printed. I think there were 33s, and but they're printed $20, and he had X amount of them. But if anyone has ever traveled outside the country, they always ask you at customs, are you carrying more than $10,000 on your person? And if you're carrying $10,000 in gold or $20,000 in gold, but it's minted, $50 US Eagles, the answer is no. I'm carrying 10 $50 coins. I'm carrying $500. And so you can legally write $500. I'm coming in with 500 US dollars into, say, Mexico. And if they don't honor that agreement, like, SEAL teams inbound. I mean, that's the promise of the American empire. I mean, that's the promise of what we have built. Now, I mean, I think that is absolutely in a point of change, as Andy has laid out. And you guys have done a wonderful job. I mean, the best guests and the best content on really laying out what is occurring with the BRICS nations. But again, going back to that monetary energy and front running people as investors, where is that monetary energy going to shift? Okay, it shifts to Russia and China. Okay, possibly, great. What are they going to use to back their currencies? They're going to use a commodity. What represents commodities the best? What is the best equal weight and measurement and best scale? Proverbs told us 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, that that was gold. And today it still is. Mm-hmm. The only thing worth more than that is wisdom, which took me a long time to really understand that wisdom is more profitable than silver and holds value better than gold. But it's true. But ultimately, I mean, we're essentially front running these macro global changes, and something that is, in my opinion, not a risk whatsoever, because it's got a 5,000-year history of always winning.
Well, and I think you see for a while, right at the beginning of sanctions against Russia and stuff like that, it didn't, yes, the ruble, went sky high for a little bit, but it wasn't affecting them as far as what they could actually import and export, because they were using gold. And same thing. And China is working off of a gold-backed digital yuan now. And so, it's pretty clear what direction these two big players are, what the commodities basket they're putting their eggs in. So
gold has this unique property where it is a ledger of account, and it is fungible, as you pointed out. And there are other things that monetary energy drains to. For example, oil is a currency. I mentioned earlier, Coca-Cola is a currency. Tide laundry soap, believe it or not, is absolutely a currency in certain neighborhoods. I kid you, absolutely not. It is a real thing. Gold just happens to be the most universal, where you can trade with the Russians, the Chinese, the Irish. Gold is good everywhere. Gold is volatile currency or cash, but it is good cash. And it's not, in my opinion, it's been the most consistent cash. I mean, certainly throughout history, but it's certainly been the most consistent asset class all year. And as things are continuing to worsen, I mean, we're just seeing the market for gold get tighter and tighter. We're seeing the physical supply of gold and silver getting drawn up, and we haven't even hit pre-rush. And as Elijah pointed out to earlier, Rick Rule cites that the average American had some sort of allocation, or an individual who had some sort of allocation to gold, whether it's mining stocks or whatnot, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5%. We're under 0.5% currently. So he pitches that we will see a 3x if we only return to mean, not if we actually see a 10% allocation to gold, or 10% of the people allocating 10%. So if we just return to mean, gold probably rips higher from here, may dip a little bit in between as we see a strengthening dollar. But these two assets can rise together. I mean, gold and the dollar can rise together. And then if we see this monetary reset, this great reset, whatever this may be at some point in time, and we see like Russia peg their currency to the gold, or we see like there's even an open exchange window with the digital yuan, because historically people haven't trusted the Chinese. So maybe, initially in the early phases of this, they will have an open exchange window so you can exchange in and out. But gold has this unique property of being fully fungible. So just like oil, it can come from Russia, it can go to India, it can be refined in India and shipped right into the US, which is what's happening. Or be shipped right into Germany. As long as it goes through India first, and as long as India gets the benefit of getting discounted oil and can make that extra margin, and then they can go and purchase gold through the open window on the Hong Kong exchange. Well, that's, it's great for India. It's great for Germany. It's great and none of the actual goals of the US elites are being accomplished, but it's a fully fungible currency. Because you really don't know if that oil came from Siberia, or if it came from Alaska, or if it came from Mexico. We have no idea. Likewise with gold, it's one of these things where pre-33s have a certain value because they are stamped 20 US dollars, and that is important. That has a lot of role to play. And US stamped things that came from the mint do have a role to play. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if I go to a non-US friendly territory, I can always melt that down and turn it into a bar. And it still holds its exact same value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is a universal currency, and throughout history, it's always held value. So it's so important, I think, to be aware of what's going on right now, and to have something of real value. As we mentioned at the beginning, having it as insurance, and in these volatile times, maybe it's a way also to take advantage of anomalies. But if people are interested in learning more, Travis, where can they find you online? And I know we'll definitely be having you on again. We only really covered financial prepping right now. You have a channel, On-Site Travel, that really goes into a lot more topics with respect to prepping and everything that's happening.
Within reason. Yeah, within reason. So On-Site Travel is a great one. That's that's a channel I've been working on for a little bit. And a brand new one I just launched is Leicht Capital, spelled Leicht. Leicht Capital. That's where I'm putting 6-minute, 7-minute things. Really something that I can share with like family. That are quick lessons, the gold to Dow ratio, why it's important, why it's a cool speculation. My cousins, for example, that's a video I'm sending over to them. Just be like, hey guys, you're in college right now. Maybe stack silver with every paycheck. And then when you get out, maybe it'll be time to move into gold. And then maybe it'll be time to go into the Dow at some point in time, right? So 6-minute to 10-minute lessons on finance, economics, and then over on the On-Site Trav channel, all things food, forest, homestead. My trade is construction and land clearing. My parents are real estate brokers. My wife is a realtor. So we are in real estate development, and we're around these types a lot. And, so I put that type of content. If you're into that, tractors, all that stuff, that's over there.
And Travis, one thing I watched some of the video content on Leicht Capital. And one thing I really appreciate there is what you mentioned earlier of this idea of it's not doom and gloom, and you're going, hey, look, yeah, the times can be rough, times can be good, but hey, here's how to be prepared for that. And you're more of an evangelist for proper preparedness rather than being like, if you're not prepared, it's going to go bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, as we wrap, I mean, look, we might be moving into this awesome green tech utopia, and like in that case, silver's going to 1,000 an ounce. It's just math. All right. Like that's possible, and great. And copper's like going with it. And Egypt is really interesting to study because that's the only place in the world that ever went 1-to-1 gold to silver. So it's really interesting. Why did that occur? They must have been doing a lot of things that maybe those are important elements. But maybe we do go through a bad time, and you've got something that's tradable, and you have a unit of account instead of trading what originally is debt, which is how money basically formed, which is like, hey, I'll give you a cow. I know you don't have anything, but hey, you owe me something, right? And so we formulate debt, and eventually we have debt notes and their IOUs, and we circulate them. You have a unit of account that is payment by itself if you do need it. One thing that I think is important for your listeners to understand is that you guys, my understanding, are gold and silver brokers. And so working with these guys and their father, is an important thing to have set up a relationship with them, have an email with them, a phone number with them, an ACH information with them. So when there is a moment where you're like, I want to make moves, I want to make moves right now, you're an easy client to work with. And then likewise, I understand that Miles Franklin offers some storage. And so in some cases, like I have a brother that lives in Manhattan, I don't recommend he hold any physical metal there. I don't recommend he holds it at Dad's safe, the safe at the Bank of Dad or with Miles Franklin in like one of 9 different locations they offer. But likewise, if you are interested in that silver trade, having it on account where you can like just log in or call these guys and say, I'd like to sell some silver today and buy some gold. You never have to you can make that trade immediately. As opposed to if you speak to anyone in 2011, the summer of 2011, if you weren't on it in July, man, by September, by October, the game was over. We moved in. We thought at that point we were going to have this big depression. And then, 2011, 2012 happens. And we just have this docile moment until September of 2019 when things get dicey again. So these things happen, but it's important that you guys reach out to, you hear this all the time, but it really is important that you start the process of building a relationship with guys like this.
Travis, thank you so much for your time. We'll put links in the description of this video to both of your YouTube channels. And just thank you so much for joining us today, and God bless.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.